Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Widener, MSCI President and CEO, and welcome to today's webinar. First of all, I know I speak for David and Donna in saying thank you for your time today, and we hope that you, your families, your colleagues, and their families are all safe and well. We've got an exciting webinar today focusing on the 2020 presidential and congressional election and its potential impact on the economy, manufacturing, and the metals industry. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items I would like to go over with you. Your audio is muted to eliminate any background noise. We are going to be accepting Q&A, and we encourage questions. David and Donna are looking forward to your questions, so please submit your questions in the Q&A panel in Zoom as we go along. It's now my pleasure and honor to introduce our panelists today. First, I'd like to welcome back to MSCI Donna Brazile. Donna has devoted her life to working for progressive change, responsible governance, and the advancement of all people in a society that is fair and equitable. Donna has worked on every major presidential campaign since 1976, and in 2000, she became the first African-American woman to serve as the manager of a major party presidential campaign, running the campaign of former Vice President Al Gore. Donna has also served as chair of the DNC. Many of you know she is a contributor to Fox News and was formerly a contributor to ABC News and CNN. She is the founder and director of Brazile & Associates, a general consulting grassroots advocacy and training firm based in Washington, D.C. David Urban serves as the president of the American Continental Group, a consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. David is a political commentator on CNN and is a member of President Trump's 2020 Advisory Committee. Mr. Urban has been referred to by both the New York Times and Politico as a prominent Republican GOP lobbyist, a top influencer on Politics Magazine, and a big-name lobbyist by CNN. When the Trump administration was sworn in, Politico named David Urban one of the 30 most powerful people in Washington. In July 2019, he was appointed by the president to the Board of Visitors for the United States Military Academy at West Point. Both Donna and David have got some prepared comments, approximately 10 to 15 minutes each, and then we'll go into Q&A. So we'll start with Donna. David will follow with his prepared comments, and then we look forward to your Q&A. Donna and David, on behalf of MSCI, thank you very much for your participation today. Thanks for being part of this webinar. And I know I speak for everybody on the webinar. We look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you very much. And Donna, let's turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Bob. And it's such a great honor to be back with all of you. As you all know, I enjoyed coming to the many events that you've invited me over the years. I've learned so much. We've had some good meals, and honestly, David, I miss having a drink or two with Bob and Chris, but here we are, this wonderful day, 21 days before the 2020 election season will come to an end. The way I describe this election season is that it's been perhaps one of the most disruptive we've seen in our lifetime, and God knows this is my 10th anniversary of voting in a presidential election, so that's 40 years. I was a teenager when I registered to vote in Louisiana. Don't worry, I did turn 18, and you know in Louisiana you can start drinking at 14, driving at 15, but you can't start drinking until you're 18 or so. But I started early, but I did register that first year. I'll never forget Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and here we are now, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the incumbent, and let me just say this off the bat, while he is down in the polls, his approval ratings remain underwater. Anything can happen in 21 days, and David and I can get into that a little bit later. But this is a big election because in addition to the presidential, of course, we have a control of Congress up for grabs. 35 Senate seats, Republicans are defending 22. And of course, we have all 435 members of the House of Representatives. And despite the fact that there are 435 races, only 44 of them are truly competitive. That's down from 77 in 2018, one of the largest midterm elections in the last 50 years. Over the next couple of weeks, we have one more presidential debate. As you all know, the debate this week was canceled in Miami. David, it was my opportunity to come down to Florida to try to work on this TAN. As you can tell, I still need to come on down there. I'll come and hang out with you and your family down there in Lee County or wherever you are in Southwest Florida. But the truth of the matter is that despite the fact that we have one more presidential debate remaining in Nashville, Tennessee on October 22nd, the race is pretty much steady. I mean, at least it's been steady since the summer. Joe Biden remains strong because he's been able to capture the Obama coalition, the coalition that produced 8 years of Barack Obama. And he is very competitive in those 3 blue wall states that Donald Trump was able to crack 4 years ago. He is picking up a lot of momentum in states that Democrats traditionally do not invest in, and I'm referring to Texas and Georgia. And his path to 270 not only go through those 3 battleground states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, but clearly he's investing in North Carolina. I call it the insurance policy. Florida, and the Democrats also expanded into Georgia and Arizona. For his part, and I know David has more insights into the Trump campaign, they're invested in those same battleground states, but they're also putting resources into Minnesota and New Hampshire. And I think they're doubling down in Iowa and in Florida to ensure that the kind of resources that the Democrats have been able to pull off in the last 4 months will help them remain competitive. When I say this race is still open, I know you've seen just about all of the 15 polls that have been released in the last 7 days. We know that this election is going to be won on the margins. And while the Biden campaign now has the resources in order to win, the Trump campaign has been on the ground for 3 years. They have knocked on more doors than I've ever seen before. I call it COVID conscious canvassing. They're canvassing in all of those battleground states. The Biden campaign is on the ground. They're clearly playing catch up, but they're relying heavily on the millions, multi-million dollar advertising campaign, not just on local television, but also on social media. Again, the Trump campaign has an advantage there. So the big issues tend to be what we all know, the coronavirus pandemic and the president handling of it, the economy, where the president remains, the president still has a slight edge on the economy, what I call social justice, law and order issues. Of course, the Supreme Court is another big issue, and climate change for many Democrats that still remain a very motivating factor to get people out to vote. In the end, if Biden continues to make this a referendum, he will have at least a 2 to 3 point advantage in the polls. But if it becomes a choice election, a choice between, say, a Democrat or Republican, a choice between however you want to frame it in terms of how we cast both leaders, then the president could have a slight advantage. In the closing weeks of the campaign, there's no question, at least on the Democratic side, President Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama, will be a huge factor in trying to motivate and get more young voters out to the polls, the millennials, Generation X, Y, in addition to President Obama, celebrities, athletes, the traditional group of individuals who help motivate some of the Democratic coalition. They will be out there to try to motivate those last minute undecided voters. One other, I think, area that we see Democrats participating. 4 years ago, the Clinton campaign did not put any resources into rural communities, a lot of money in suburban areas, but this time they're, in addition to the suburban areas, the Biden campaign is heavily invested in the rural communities to try to offset some of the losses that we saw in 2016. In terms of the Senate races, there's plenty of Senate races for the Democrats to continue to focus. Of course, we all hear about Maine and Colorado because those are 2 very important states that Clinton won in 2016, and we're going to try to defeat Susan Collins, although, you know, when you look at her polling numbers up in Maine, she's behind, but Susan Collins always runs behind, and she tends to come out ahead. But this time she has a very strong opponent in Sarah Gideon. In Colorado, Cory Gardner, the incumbent senator, has a very strong challenger, and the former governor, John Hickenlooper, who ran for the presidency. Well, everyone ran for president in Democratic primary. And then Arizona is another state where Democrats are very competitive. Former astronaut Mark Kelly, well, I guess he's still an astronaut. I don't know if he ever become an ex-astronaut, but he is challenging Martha McSally. Democrats are also very hopeful in a number of other senatorial states, Montana and Iowa, Alaska. Yes, I didn't even know if we have to stay up that late on election night, David, but Alaska, the Democrats are feeling a little confident. We need another race because North Carolina is, let's just say when we get in the Q&A, we'll talk about sex, drugs, and alcohol. Actually, he has some text messages that got out. I didn't leak them, but Cal Cunningham, who is challenging Tom Tillis, is clearly, he was leading just a few weeks ago until it was revealed that he had an affair. So that's a big issue now. In the state of Georgia, oh my Lord, there are 2 Senate races there. I don't know how we'll come out, but Democrats are very confident that they can pick up at least 1 or 2. And I don't know if you saw the early voting yesterday in Georgia. The lines were 2, 3, 4 blocks long. South Carolina, Lindsey Graham is in a little bit of hot water. Jamie Harrison has not only raised a significant amount of money, $53 million. Don't even ask me how that money got to South Carolina, but $53 million. And that race is pretty much a jump ball and it's tied. But there are so many other interesting races out there. Democrats have to defend, of course, Alabama, Doug Jones, who won in a special election in 2017. He has a very strong challenger. And of course, Gary Peters up in Michigan. He's up by 1 point. That's another race that Democrats are very worried about. Well, I'll close by saying this because, Bob, I told you I was going to try to keep it short, not get long-winded, not try to filibuster, do anything crazy. But I'm hoping that sometime around midnight or 1 a.m. we will have a clear verdict on election night. But because most of the ballots will be postmarked, at least in some states, on election day, we may not get the true accurate count of how many Americans participated. But I do know for the first time, at least in the last 10 cycles that I participated, not just as a voter, but also as a political operative, 84% of the American people have a strong interest in participating. And over 75% believe that they will vote, try to get their ballots in early. I've never seen this type of motivation to participate in our electoral process. So with that, I'll turn over the balance of my time to my former colleague at CNN, a very smart, interesting man. I call him interesting because David continues to lead one of the most interesting lives in American politics, but I follow him on Twitter and I try to keep up with him, at least whenever they mention his name, because I like to know what David is up to. So David, since you're down in the Sunshine State and you're going to make sure those 29 electoral votes go in the right direction, and when I say that, I hope it comes back my direction at some point, but I'll let you take the balance of this time. And it's good to see you, David.
Thank you, Donna. Thanks, Bob. You know, a few observations. I love Donna's dog there. It's so cute, such a beauty. Everybody has a dog at home these days, and no one gets to leave their dogs anymore. You know, Donna was talking about how on election night, you know, we think she hopes we'll know, and I hope we'll know as well. But I really don't think that's going to be the case this year, right? I think that there's so many outstanding ballots in Pennsylvania, for example. 2 million voters requested absentee ballots, and only about 4% have been returned thus far. But they have until election day to get them postmarked, and they can't be open and counted until election day. So 2 million. Let's just say we get half of those in, 1 million ballots. I doubt they're going to be all counted in time by election night. And, you know, in Pennsylvania, we eked out a victory by roughly 44,292 votes. And so if there's 1 million, let's say 50% of the people return their ballots, there's 1 million ballots to be counted. That's a pretty big undertaking. And then there's going to be a controversy in Pennsylvania, you know, and Donna's very well aware of this, and maybe some of you are as well. These absentee ballots are very complicated. They're way more complicated than they should be, in my opinion. But in Pennsylvania, you have to take your ballot and put it inside a sleeve and then put it inside another envelope. So there's almost 3 steps that are required to get your ballot submitted and be able to be counted. And you know, if you don't have it, you know, submitted the correct way, it's called a naked ballot. And there's a big, you know, controversy, court cases now in Pennsylvania swirling whether naked ballots will be counted. And so I anticipate that, you know, my sense is that while I am hopeful, and I'm sure Donna's hopeful, that each of our respective candidates has a big electoral college victory, and, you know, we're not going to be waiting on Pennsylvania. I think we could be waiting almost up until Thanksgiving, which will require a great deal of patience from Americans, and I am hopeful that people will have that level of patience. Just a little bit of background. I thought when I talked to Bob initially about this, I have my ties to the steel industry or specialty steel, but the steel industry are very long. I grew up in a union household. My father was a member of the Aliquippa. My dad worked at the J&L Aliquippa Works, which at one point in time stretched for 7 miles along the Ohio River there in Aliquippa. He was a member of Local 1211. My father started out his career in the tin mill in Aliquippa in Pennsylvania. And I remember my dad growing up as a kid. My father was always fearful that the tin mill was going to get closed and he was going to be out of work. And he was constantly looking for and thinking about what a different role he could have in the steel industry. So my father went and became a boiler maker at J&L and worked on the furnaces. And you know, would come home and tell me about his work there. And you know, his fear was misplaced about the tin mill, because to this day, years later, the entire stretch of Aliquippa is now brownfield site, with the exception of J&L's tin mill, which still remains in place under this very day. So you know, iron and the steel business. There's an old vaudeville joke that my parents are in the iron and steel business. My mother ironed and my father steels. And you know, so I come from the iron and steel business as well. My family, all, you know, card-carrying members of the USW. So your industry is very near and dear to my heart. Grew up in Pittsburgh. You know, I'm familiar with lots of your member companies up and down the Ohio River there, and across Pennsylvania and across America. So thank you for having me. As Donna pointed out, you know, President Trump does have a certain bit of an advantage from being the incumbent president. And despite the negative, all the negative press that you see swirling now, there are some things that still remain true. And I don't put, as Donna knows, she's been around this game a long time, I don't put a whole lot of credence in polling. It's kind of all over the place. I remember, you know, I did this in 2016 with President Trump. I was a paid advisor at that time, senior advisor in Pennsylvania, and helped steer Pennsylvania. This time I am informally helping out, talk to the president on Friday for a while. But the president still remains slightly ahead in every poll you see, in terms of who do you trust to rebuild the economy? Who do you think will do a better job in kind of helping rebound? And when the question is asked, the famous Ronald Reagan question is asked, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? An amazingly, you know, solid 50+%, 54%, I think recently, of Americans reply, yes, they are better off than they were 4 years ago. So those two numbers, I think, are instructive in terms of of where we go. If the president wins re-election, and there's obviously it's you know, they have elections because no one can foresee the future. No one can tell what's going to happen. If the president wins, it'll win because of the strength of that, strength of the belief that people feel that he is better suited to handle the challenges of the economy, and the belief that they feel that they are better off. Even the folks at the you know, the kind of lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, real wage growth is really went up during the Trump administration. Obviously, Donna points out, you know, the president's handling of the pandemic is a big issue. A millstone around the president's neck does very poorly amongst seniors, not doing very well there. And that will be something that kind of drags the president down. As far as, you know, as far as MSCI, I think, you know, President Trump has done a very good job. You guys, I believe, you know, most of you in your industry, when I say you guys, I should, your industry, it's a collective term, are very friendly with Secretary Ross, with Ambassador Lighthizer. I'm sure are very familiar with the Section 232 tariffs the president imposed, and trying to help stabilize and maintain and grow steel industry. Mini mills, as you are all aware, have been doing very well for years, but this president, I think, has really staked out a course in saying that we want to try to help bolster the American steel industry, and we'll try to do so. Donna's point earlier as well about the Trump campaign versus the Biden campaign. In the Biden campaign, to a large extent, has been relying on virtual campaign, a lot of TV, a lot of virtual events. The Trump campaign has really done an incredible job in the RNC on knocking on doors, COVID conscious. And Donna pointed out an all-time record high of voter contacts in the state of Pennsylvania, my home state, which I still play a large role in. We've recruited and trained close to 100,000 volunteers for get out the vote efforts for GOTV last, you know, on election day, last kind of 72 hours rallying folks. If the Biden campaign loses, I would say they will lose because of that effort. I would say on the ground now, SEIU and some labor unions have began to kind of door knock in Pennsylvania, but began to do some in-person campaigning in Pennsylvania. The polling is everywhere, as Donna points out. You know, you see these wild polls that Trump is down 10, 12 points in Pennsylvania. And I simply say, if that were the case, if that were true, you wouldn't see the Vice President Biden campaigning in Pennsylvania, not yesterday, the day before yesterday. You wouldn't see so much time and energy be put in, because I will point out and remind everybody that October 7th, 2016 was the release of the Access Hollywood Billy Bush tape. I will tell you that Donald Trump, I had the president then for the first event that was done after that Access Hollywood tape, not too interestingly, in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. We did an event at Ambridge High School, and we had a couple events that morning that people canceled, that folks were canceling. So that week, I believe it was the week of October 10th last year, 2016, was a terrible, terrible week. People were not just not going to vote for the president; they were bailing on Trump left and right. It was a downward death spiral which everybody faced. And so Donna points out correctly, and I think that there's a whole lot of race left to go. People have largely made up their minds. I think there are leaners, and everybody's fighting now for those kind of leaners, right? There's you know, I don't know if anyone in America has ever come across someone who's undecided at this point, right? If there are undecided voters, I've not met one. I can tell you, I meet people who are very strong Trump people, and I meet people who are very anti-Trump people. I've never met someone who said to me in the past 4 years, I don't really know what I think about this guy. I haven't made up my mind yet. And so they must be out there someplace, because everyone's fighting for him. And I predict this will be a very close election still. I think, as Donna points out again, there are lots of very interesting down ballot races in the Senate, especially in the House in Pennsylvania. In the Pennsylvania House, I would just say I'm watching two races to kind of see almost as predictive of the presidency. So you have PA 17, which is Connor Lamb. It's a Pittsburgh suburb race. Connor's a very affable, attractive guy, won a special election, combat veteran. He's running against a Republican by the name of Sean Parnell, combat decorated veteran, motivational speaker, very credible candidate. So that PA 17 race, that's basically the Pittsburgh suburbs, Ambridge, Aliquippa, Beaver County, my home county. That's going to be a dispositive race, as well as PA 8, Matt Cartwright versus Jim Bognet. Those two races, those are Trump districts. They both went for Trump in 2016, but they both have Democratic congressmen right now. But both of those Democratic congressmen have very face stiff opposition. So if those two races, if you're watching the returns, if you're online looking and you see Sean Parnell with a big lead, or Jim Bognet with a big lead, then you can kind of think, wow, Pennsylvania's probably going to end up voting for Donald Trump. So those kind of races, I think, as Donna points out, Alaska, there's so many races that are just interesting, that are really competitive this year for a wide variety of reasons. Your Arizona race, that are distinct from the president. So, the people like to think, oh, the president's going to make or break Martha McSally. Not really. Martha McSally makes or break Martha McSally. The same thing with Dan Sullivan in Alaska, right? He has a very credible opponent in Alaska for the first time. And so these races come down, as much as people like to think that the presidents have coattails, candidates actually matter in these races. And so there is just not the presidency on the ballot here. There's control of the Senate and the House. I think the House would be a stretch, right, to kind of take back. I think Republicans are hoping to kind of hold on to the Senate, maybe pick up a seat, kind of hold what they've got and come out the other side. But election night will be very, very interesting. I think we'll know these House races, we'll know some of the Senate races, but we might not know the presidency on election night. So with that, Bob, I think ready to take Q&A or whatever you desire.
Sure. Well, thank you both for your comments. And it's interesting. The first question that came in from the audience, actually, Donna, is a question you and I talked about last week. And the question is, why won't Vice President Biden comment on stacking of the Supreme Court? Why won't he give a list out of the types of judges that he would consider appointing? Again, literally the first question that came in from the audience. But to both of you, but I'll start with you first, Donna. Thoughts on the Vice President's reluctance to talk about these questions that I think a lot of voters are interested in?
Well, I think there are three reasons, maybe four. The first thing is that when Justice Ginsburg passed away, as you know, she has been just one of the champions of change, and a woman who, before she became a member of the Supreme Court, was hailed as someone who really advanced the cause of equal justice under the law, especially for women in this country. And so the Democrats made the decision not to focus on any tactical process arguments, but instead to focus on her legacy and what would be at stake. Traditionally, the Supreme Court has never been an issue that has motivated the Democratic base to turn out. It's been an issue for the Republicans, but not the Democrats. And so for Democrats out there, healthcare has become the issue that we believe will motivate Democrats to get out to vote. So this whole issue of court packing, as you all know, goes back to FDR back in the 1930s when he wanted to get his New Deal program through. No Democrat has argued for this, with one exception, and that is, of course, Alexandria Cortez. She has been the #1 target on the right. So if she walks out tomorrow and says the sky is blue, the Republicans will highlight that all day long, and then, of course, try to get Democrats or moderate to other leaning Democrats to say, no, she's wrong, or yes, she's right. So Chuck Schumer made the decision early on and told the Democratic caucus, we're not going to comment on this because that's not what is in front of us. What's in front of us is that the Republican Party has packed the court. As you know, President Obama left a number of vacant federal judgeships that he could not get through the Republican-controlled Senate. He could not get his Supreme Court choice through the Senate. I mean, in some cases, they didn't give him a hearing. And so the Democrats made the decision not to play this game. What Joe Biden said yesterday, I think, is probably the best you're going to get from the Democrats, and that is, we're not going to discuss this because that's not part of our plan. And that is the truth. That is what I've heard from everyone in the Senate. I've heard it directly from Kamala Harris. I've heard it from Chuck Schumer. I've even heard it from some of the progressive groups, but it is not a big issue. Now, I know for a fact that there are a long list of Democrats that we would like to see on the court, or a long list of judges we would like to see under consideration. The vice president said back in March, when this question came to him, that if he has an opportunity as president, he would like to see a Black woman on the court. He has chosen a Black woman as his running mate, but I have not seen, and I know just about everybody within the party, I have not seen a list, nor have I heard it come from the Democratic Party or the Democratic leadership. So this is not going to be an issue. No matter how many questions come our way, it's not going to be an issue for the Democratic Party, because it's not a motivator for Democrats. It may be a motivator for Republicans, but they've already stacked the courts. President Trump has been highly successful, as he said in a debate 2 weeks ago, and packing the courts, the federal judiciary. So it's not an issue for us.
David, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I would just say that, you know, one of the things that I think that Trump did very smartly, as Donna points out, is during the campaign, put a list out of who he thought would be suitable Supreme Court nominees, and has kind of picked off that list moving forward. As Donna correctly points out as well, you know, it is an issue. The Supreme Court is an issue much more gravity for Republicans and for the Democratic base. I would say, and I agree with her as well, like the Supreme Court nominees are not going to move the needle here in the last few hours. What I do think is important, though, is I think that the vice president, answering the question or not answering the question, it illustrates the fact that the vice president clearly, he's a smart guy, doesn't want to alienate any voters, right, in the Democratic base by putting out a potential list of people who may or may not be either sufficiently moderate or sufficiently liberal enough for anybody in the party. Just good politics on his part, not putting it out. You know, when you're ahead, you don't want to make a mistake when you're perceived ahead. You know, the vice president was smart to, when your candidate's ahead, you make no mistakes, right? You try to make no mistakes. So the Republicans are smart for pointing out that he is not talking about packing the court, because by not saying you're not going to pack the court, the implication is you are going to pack the court. And so it is an issue that motivates Republicans. I think that if I was advising the vice president, I'd do exactly the same and tell him, you know, don't talk about it. You're only going to make a mistake. You're not going to say anything that's going to help your case. A non-answer is the best answer for you at this part. But I think it's instructive for Republicans and maybe some leaners that where he may go. Although I doubt that anybody who's a leaner is going to vote for Trump or Biden based on their nominee for the court.
So I would like to point out, David, that in the first critical days following the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Democrats raised over $100 million. I'm just shocked at the amount of money that I don't know where all of this money is coming from. I've never seen this kind of money, $100 million. And of course, this helps the Democrats. This vacancy helps the Democrats. They're drawn in on the issue of healthcare. This healthcare is going to be on the docket when the Supreme Court returns. It opens up an attack on the GOP incumbent senators as hypocrites, because as you know, in 2016, they say we didn't have time in an election year. It was 260 some odd days before the election. This time is less than 30. So this is impacting the races in several senatorial contests. And it really helps the Democrats to talk about what we like to talk about. But as you know, any day that President Trump can get away with not talking about the coronavirus is a good day for him. So the president had a good day yesterday because he didn't have to talk about the coronavirus. He could go out and campaign and hit the trail again and pretty much set his own agenda.
So I'd like to switch for a second to a subject near and dear to our members, and that is infrastructure. Now, no one disputes the fact that this country needs infrastructure, and we've been talking about infrastructure probably for decades under both Clinton, Obama, Bush, and Trump. Yet real meaningful infrastructure is very, very difficult to ever get done, whether one party controls everything or whether we have split government. So I know folks on this webinar would be very interested in your perspective on, is there any hope for under whatever combination of what happens on election day, are we finally going to, in 2021, start to see progress, meaningful progress on infrastructure? Donna, I'll let you answer that first, please.
Well, if you unpack the 390 bills sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk, somewhere in that huge pile is an infrastructure bill that the House Democrats passed, and it had some Republican support. In fact, over a third of the bills sitting on McConnell's desk has bipartisan support. I do believe that we can pull together a bipartisan majority on infrastructure. You know, there over the last 2 years, there's been several opportunities for the Democrats working with the president, not Mitch McConnell, to get deals done. But McConnell made, he said up front, he's not moving any legislation. He's not going to push any of the bills that comes out of the House unless it involves the funding of the government, which, as you know, I call that kick the can down the road. But those bills are not moving under the leadership of Mitch McConnell. So hopefully, if we have a Biden-Harris administration and the Democrats have sufficient numbers in the Senate, there could be a Senate House-led bill that the Vice President can sign that will get us further ahead on this critical issue. I mean, if you talk about China and how we're falling behind, well, this is one area, whether it's high-speed rail, high-speed internet, rebuilding our roads and bridges, our manufacturing sector. There are so many areas where we can make dramatic improvements, but we really need the type of leadership, not just in the White House, but also on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, Bob, so I am not so optimistic about those chances. I am a huge proponent of infrastructure spending. I used to be, when I worked on Capitol Hill, I was chief of staff for a guy back then by the name of Arlen Specter, who was an appropriator, right? There's the joke in Washington, there are three types of members, right? Your Democrats, Republicans, and appropriators. And the appropriators were a breed unto themselves and believed in spending on things of the public good, such as NIH and infrastructure, things that benefited all Americans. And I believe that, infrastructure spending, big infrastructure bills, in the, kind of the vein of the Bud Schusters of the world back in the day, right? A rising tide lifts all boats with big infrastructure spending. And I would have loved to have seen it. I argued with this president and argued to this president early on in the administration that should have been the first thing that he did, reached across the aisle, got with Chuck Schumer, cut a big infrastructure bill, fixed America up. I think we'd be in a completely different place. I think the administration would have kind of started out, instead of going and fighting on healthcare initially, should have done an infrastructure bill, would have got things done. However, I am fearful now that because of the trillions of dollars that we've spent on a wide variety of things, not least of which is the coronavirus and the pandemic, that our deficits are so large, and the appetite in the Congress for spending and moving big pieces of legislation is going to be somewhat curtailed. I think there's a big argument to be made that infrastructure is needed now more than ever. Coming out of this pandemic, it's a way to stimulate the economy, put people back to work. Lots of your members need to ship things over the roads and need exit ramps into industrial parks and need railheads established, and it lifts all boats, and I would like to see it. I am not hopeful, however, just because of the entire. I believe this is going to require not just a few folks on both sides out. It's going to require a majority of people, and I don't know if there's a stomach there because of the huge deficits we're racking up right now. and I'm not, I don't believe that somehow the Republicans now care about deficits all of a sudden. I just think that there's a little bit of spending weariness in the Congress, and that I'd like to see it part of if there could be part of a stimulus package here after the election. The president said we're going to do something. I'd love to see even have the small portion of spending go towards infrastructure. As Donna said, broadband, there's lots of things we can do, lots of things that need to be done in America, but I just don't know if there's going to be the stomach for it.
Right. So I'm assuming from your comments on infrastructure that both of you would probably agree the likelihood of any kind of stimulus being done before the election is probably slim to none. Is that a fair characterization from the two of you?
I agree with you. I don't think that, the president is kind of balked on a big bill and said, hey, I'll do airlines, I'll do checks, but not going to do a big bill. So, he's, said pencils down to Mnuchin. So hard to get a deal without both sides cooperating. So I would think you're correct, Bob.
It's sad because, as you know, the Democrats passed a bill in May. It was $3 trillion. The Republicans said, no, we have to focus on a package that is less than $1 trillion. The Democrats came back with $2.2 trillion. The Republicans, or at least the White House, Mnuchin came up, I believe, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, 1.6. I mean, we're $600 billion short, and I'm not a big spender. I'm on the more conservative side of the Democratic ledger. I know we've spent a hell of a lot of money during this pandemic, but if we're that close and we can continue to try to help people get this virus under control and to help those Americans who are struggling through no fault of their own, I think would be a win-win for the American people. I mean, I know everyone is worried about, well, what is this going to do for the election? People are struggling. It is hard out there. They are hurting. 800,000 people a week filing for unemployment insurance, states running out of money. I hope that they could come up with even if it's a smaller package, something that would just stabilize the economy and stabilize our working class folks through the next couple of months would be helpful, at least to get everyone through the end of the year. I don't know if you saw recently, David, that the CDC issued guidelines on evictions. They're worried that if more Americans get thrown out of their apartments or homes, that we run the risk of having another massive wave of this virus. So we need to pay attention to what's happening with the American people and stop doing this, what I call this small scale politics. When you come down from $3 trillion, you're at 2.2, and you come up from less than $1 trillion to now 1.6. If I do believe 1.8 is a good number. I don't know but something out to help the people out there who are still hurting would be a plus before the election.
Right. So we have another question for the audience that I'm actually going to expand. I'd like you to expand upon, and it has to do with what would manufacturing and supply chains to manufacturing kind of look like under a Biden administration. But I'm going to expand upon that and ask you both to sort of paint a picture for manufacturing and industrial metals within manufacturing. Paint us a picture of what a second Trump administration might look like, and paint for us both a picture as seen through your lens and your paintbrush of what would manufacturing and industrial metals supply chain to manufacturing, what would that look like under a Biden administration? David, we're going to punt this one to you first, and then we'll have Donna paint us her picture under both administrations.
Well, look, early on in this administration, I think, your members are aware of what the president did in Section 232 with a 25% tariff on steel and then subsequent 10% tariff on aluminum, and his commitment to trying to bring back supply chain and manufacturing back to U.S. shores from abroad. It's obviously, you're pushing a big rock up a hill on a wide variety of fronts. And I think you'd see a continuation of those policies. You know, we spoke about this a little bit earlier or last week, Bob, about this, but it also depends to a large extent on who ends up in the administration in the second term. You know, your members, I think, are very familiar with Secretary Ross and Ambassador Lighthizer, and I think they have favorable opinions of both of those gentlemen. You know, policy, you know, personnel equals policy. If you get some folks in second term who are very familiar with the industry, who you know, share a similar worldview as the president, that would be, I think, a very positive thing for specialty metal and steels. And that I believe this president has done as much as anybody, if not more so anybody, in terms of really trying to shine a light on the issues of dumping and the problems that the American steel industry and especially steel industry faces on a global scale. So, you know, hard to exactly answer how things might change. You know, if Ambassador Lighthizer stays on, Wilbur Ross stays on, I think the president's, you know, policies in terms of, you know, trying to bring back supply chain, produce more here in the United States, I think those things are a net plus all for the United States. I think, you know, we've got obviously big trade issues with China, still need to be worked out. Some of these other countries, we renegotiated USMCA, I think is a net positive for your members. So there's been some preview of it in these past 3 years, 3.5 years. I think you'd see continuation on that, perhaps an expansion, and just how robust it would be, I think, would be dependent upon who you get to serve in those very important roles at Commerce, USTR, Treasury, and the like. So not a cop out, but you know, it's you know, if we get some good folks, president's had this America First policy with terms of manufacturing and a real focus on that. And I think you could expect to see that continued on, perhaps in even a more robust fashion.
Well, and also, David, before we go to Donna, would you paint, again, your picture of what a Biden administration manufacturing and industrial metal supply chain world would look like under a Biden administration?
Again, and this is the good part about Joe Biden. This is why Donna and the Democrats are very smart, right, for picking Joe Biden, is because he's kind of a Rorschach test, right? In Joe Biden, you can see what you'd like to see. If you want to see, you know, new Democrat, Bill Clinton, Al Gore, kind of, you know, conservative blue dog Democrat, that's Joe Biden. If you want to pick and see a AOC, Green New Deal, Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders loving Joe Biden, well, that's your Joe Biden too. And so it's very difficult for me to say, you know, which Joe Biden's going to show up on January 20th and put his hand in the air, right? Because there's such a large constituency. I covered all the debates for CNN and sat there and watched Joe Biden raise his hand and advocate and support some pretty radical policies. But exactly how he's going to govern is different than how he campaigns. And so, you know, I could say it's very tough for me to understand how, you know, a president who wants to implement, you know, some version of the Green New Deal and as opposed to, you know, expansion of carbon and, you know, carbon-based fuel, how that is kind of, I think that's incongruous with a, you know, a robust manufacturing and expansion of steel in America. But Donna can tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, first of all, let me just say this. As a Democrat, I have spent the last 2 years trying to remind my Republican friends and colleagues that, like your party, we are very diverse. We have progressives, we have moderates, and we have conservatives. My home state of Louisiana, we're led by a conservative Democrat who is pro-life and pro-guns. And as you all know,
fellow West Point grad, Don, a fellow West Pointer.
Absolutely, and he's a good man. I can attest to that, and I've campaigned for him relentlessly over the last 4 years. But this is a centrist party. At the heart of the party is a centrist party. Now, when I say at the heart of the party is a centrist party, it is a centrist from the practical point that the majority of Democrats who are elected officers are those who are running for office are more of the center than they are of the far left. That doesn't mean that the far left in our party are basically biding their time. There's a generational fight within the Democratic Party now, and that generational fight will be on display after the election, not right now. The party's unified. The party is behind Biden. The party's more unified behind Biden than the party was behind Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. So Joe Biden, the centerpiece of the plan is a Buy Back Better plan. Within the first 100 days, he's going to put forward an economic recovery plan that include our manufacturing sector, that support and strengthen our supply lines, that invest in the American worker and invest in American companies. This plan, which I went on the website the other day, Bob, just to make sure I had the right ideas. I mean, I think this plan is a robust plan, and we know it's going to take presidential leadership, and it's going to call on, you know, some of the governors. I think if Biden wins, Biden is going to have some really strong, talented people within the government. Some of them are former governors, some of them are current governors, but many of them, and some will come out of the private sector. You know, you have noticed probably over the last couple of months, the number of former Republican governors that have endorsed Joe Biden. So I believe that you're going to have a bipartisan cabinet, meaning more than one Democrat, more than one Republican, but the manufacturing sector, which has been in a recession, that is going to be a huge priority of the Biden plan to build back stronger and to make sure that we are up to what I believe the strength and the character to take on China and some of these other countries that have just been eating our lunch over the last couple of years.
Got time for a couple more questions here, but 4 years ago, we happened to have someone you both know very closely, Peter Hart. Peter addressed our audience shortly after President Trump beat Secretary Clinton. And the question came up, well, how did this happen? And what states this, what states that? And Peter raised a very interesting perspective that I'd like you both to comment on. Peter said, if you want to know who's going to win the presidency on election night, follow the spine of the country, basically the Mississippi. And whoever wins the vast majority of all of the states that touch the Mississippi River, he actually proved historically that individual, and it was a perspective I had never heard before. You know, we all look to Florida and Ohio, and, you know, that's how we historically kind of hear about it from the media. But Peter, who has been doing this for a long time and was brilliant, he raised this perspective that, again, I would just be interested from the two of you, and we'll start again, Donna, with you, but what are your thoughts on Peter's comment, follow the spine of the country?
Well, that's an interesting, I was looking for a map because when you think about the spine of the country, those of us who are native Louisianians, we used to say that when the folks get up in Minnesota and walk over to the river and wipe their feet in the water, it's still clear. By the time it winds its way down through Iowa and Missouri and Illinois and reach Tennessee and Arkansas, well, it's a little muddy. And when we get it down in Louisiana, as you know, we make our gumbo out of it. So I would say that when you look at the so-called battleground states along the spine of the river, there are only possibly, 2 states that are in play in terms of where the candidates, but several other states that I do believe are important. The only thing that's happened in Missouri this year is a gubernatorial race. There's a senatorial race in Tennessee, but I don't see a lot of activity. There are several congressional races in Arkansas. Mississippi has a very lively Senate race featuring Cindy Hyde-Smith, and it's a rematch with Cindy Hyde-Smith and Mike Espy. But overall, the only 2, Iowa and Minnesota, Tina Smith, who's running for Senate, and of course, Johnny Ernst, who's up for re-election. Dick Durbin is up for re-election in Illinois, but I don't see much there. So I don't know. I still think the Rust Belt states are the more interesting states to follow on election night. Of course, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, where President Trump, then candidate Trump, was able to crack the blue wall and get 78,000, I don't know, what is it now, less than 79,000 votes more than Hillary Clinton. And I have to tell you, 4 years ago, the Clinton campaign, they were overconfident. 4 years ago today, they were so confident, they sent me to Utah. David, they sent me to Utah. And I kept saying, I want to go to Detroit. I should go to Milwaukee. They were so confident and cocky in their data analysis that I had a phone call from Ed Rendell, someone you know. And Ed was telling me, the former governor, he was calling me saying, I need more resources, Madam Chair. And I said, Governor, I'm supposed to be focusing on expansion states and non-battleground states. You're okay. And he said, no, we're not okay. Ed was right. The Clinton campaign did not even visit Wisconsin. Bill Clinton raised alarms about Michigan because he heard the same thing I was hearing in Pennsylvania. This time, the Biden campaign has redoubled their efforts. And for the first time in the political season, at least since the coronavirus, the vice president is going to 2-3 states a day. So this race is not over.
Yeah. So Bob, I would just say, add that, Donna's correct. The spying comment, I'm not so sure about that. I think those states are going to kind of go where they go. On Pennsylvania, to talk about, just to kind of go where Donna's going about Pennsylvania a little bit, I will tell you, and I like to point this out, in 2016, Hillary Clinton did extremely well in Pennsylvania, unbelievably. Her vote total, the high water mark for Democrats, and you look in Pennsylvania, basically, if you look at Philadelphia and the surrounding counties, right, where the gravity of the voters lie in Pennsylvania. If you look at the vote totals of President Obama in 08 and 12, and then you go to 16, Hillary Clinton did better than Obama did in 12, and not anywhere close to his 08 numbers, which are, I submit, historical all-time highs. And Democrats, I just don't think can get there again. It's just was a different period in the world, and just not going to get there. So Clinton did what any Democrat would need to do to win Pennsylvania in a normal election year. She performed well, and so I submit that Hillary Clinton didn't lose Pennsylvania. Donald Trump won Pennsylvania, and for the Democrats to win Pennsylvania this time, they're going to have to better those 08 Barack Obama numbers, which are going to be a pretty big feat. So we'll wait and see, but this is why they have elections. And like I said, in Pennsylvania, we may be waiting until Thanksgiving. So
yeah. So I have one last question to the two of you, and it's a very serious question. And Donna, we talked a little bit about it on our call. And it has to do, when we look at history, some of the greatest things that have ever been accomplished in this country have always been done in a bipartisan manner. And I don't mean just one or two votes from the other side of the aisle. We can go back to the time of Abraham Lincoln, some legislation that was passed then. We can look at President Johnson's working with Everett Dirksen. I mean, some of the greatest things that this country has ever accomplished have always come from bipartisanship. Donna, you and I talked about, Orrin Hatch giving a eulogy at Ted Kennedy's funeral. We talked about Justice Ginsburg and Scalia being totally opposite in their view of the law, shall we say, but close friends who got along, were civil. So my question to the two of you is, are those days gone for a generation or more? Or is there some kind of hope out there that we will see, whether it's the next 4 years, the next 8 years, hopefully in our lifetime, we will see sort of a kind of coming back to a period where those kind of relationships, and meaningful work is done in a bipartisan way, or has the tribalism and the toxicity that exists with that so great that that's gone perhaps until the millennials are in their 50s or 60s or 70s. David, we're going to go to you first, and Donna, I'm going to ask you to kind of wrap up on this one last question. David?
Thank you.
Your thoughts?
I participated in a panel on this. One of the thing that Donna knows, Clinton had done a long time ago, Renaissance Weekend, right down in. This was a truly kind of a bipartisan thing that you were talking about, Bobby, where you have a lot of big thinkers get together and kind of tackle problems and talk about, think big thoughts and come together in a bipartisan fashion. Look, Americans get the government they deserve, and the problem right now is that every 10 years with the census, congressional districts are drawn safer and safer, and they encourage more partisanship each time they're redrawn. So there is zero incentive, Bob, zero, for a Democrat or a Republican to cross over and vote. If I was in Congress, Donna and I would be good friends. But there'd be zero incentive for me to work with Donna because my congressional district would punish me. I'm not afraid. If you're a congressman now, if you're a Republican congressman, you're not afraid of losing in a general election. You're afraid of losing in a primary. And that's the same that holds true in the Democratic election. You're afraid of getting primaried. I mean, look what happened to some of the leadership in the Democratic Party in New York City. That's what happened to AOC. That's what happened to lots of other folks. And so there is no incentive in America to come together and solve problems. There's an incentive to be tribal because you're rewarded for it. You're rewarded for it on MSNBC, you're rewarded for it on Fox, you're rewarded for it on your congressional district. And so up until it'll be 100 years, Bob. Nothing's going to change until we change those districts, right? Until we change how we elect our members of the House. And in the Senate now, it's become senior year for the House because, the Senate used to be the upper. I was, chief of staff for a senator who'd been there 30 plus years and was very, there was a great deal of comedy and not EDY, ITY, right, with the House. And there was a great deal of bipartisanship. And actually, Vice President Biden gave the kind of eulogy at Arlen Specter's funeral, right? And so that was normal. Now the Senate is, made up largely of members of the House who are very, partisan, who got elected, and they remain partisan. And the House is just a lost cause. So I am very, very pessimistic about the future unless people, average Americans, rise up and demand change. They demand we redraw these districts differently, we think about our government differently, and we demand people give us results and not just gridlock and partisanship in Washington.
Well, first of all, Bob, let me thank you and Chris for inviting David and I to spend some time with you and your members. I look forward to us gathering again at some point in the near future because there's so much we can talk about, and I can only imagine what many of your members are now going through and the concerns that they have in terms of the future. I started my political career not only campaigning for a city council candidate who would build a playground, but later in life, the first candidate that I ever voted for was a Republican, former Congressman and Governor of Louisiana, Dave Treen. I voted for him because I just didn't think Edwin Edwards was my type of candidate. And here I am now, some 40 years later, about to cast my ballot, and I have it in my house for Joe Biden. Joe Biden reminds me of that old style leadership. As you all know, one of the reasons why 24 Democrats challenged him in the primaries because they believe it's time that we move beyond the type of old style, old school politics of building relationship with the team on the other side of the hall. I don't think Republicans are my enemies. Republicans are my neighbors. They're my friends. They're my coworkers. They're some of my best drinking buddies, if truth be told. Don't ever take Mary Matlin and I to a Saints game. James Carville normally leaves us because he thinks we're cussing too much. But we need to go back to that era of building relationships because it's hurting our country. If you look at all of the polling over the last 10 years, the one true constant is that every institution in our society is now underwater. Every institution. Now, we can't maintain a democracy unless we strengthen the role of not just government, but Wall Street, but churches and banks, and even the military and law enforcement. So we need to get back to work. I tell my friends that I have become a disciple of not just capitalism, but a disciple of democracy, because we're in that era where many of our young people are giving up hope. They're giving up this notion that we can somehow or another come together despite our differences. Yes, we have differences. We have differences on approach, differences in terms of opinions, but at the end of the day, we share the same values. And those values should supersede all our differences. And that's why I'm proud to be an American and proud to be still at the table working to try to help shape at least one of the major.
So, David, I want to thank you very much.
David is absolutely right. David is absolutely right about where we are in this country, and we got to change our system, because as long as only Democrats participates in Democratic primaries, only Republicans, there's no incentive to come together. And I apologize, somebody was trying to call me, so you lost me.
Oh, okay.
You can't lose this beautiful face just, by the internet. You got to lose me when I say leave. But I just want to let you know, Bob, I love you guys. And I look forward to coming up to Michigan, because I know you got some good fish on the lake, and I know what to do with it once you catch it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Donna and David, on behalf of all of us at MSCI, really want to thank you for taking time out of your very, very busy schedules right now in these campaigns to share some insights with us, both your prepared comments and your candor in your Q&A. Much, much appreciated. You two are both genuine people, and that's, I think, why so many people can relate to you, because you come across as genuine, right? And so always maintain that, no matter where your paths go within your parties, right? No matter how you want to be pulled, maintain that being genuine, because you both are. And again, thank you. For all the folks who joined us today in the webinar, I want to thank you for your membership. I want to thank you for signing in to being part of this webinar today. Stay tuned for more webinars coming throughout the rest of this year. And everybody, please be safe, and look forward to our paths crossing again in the near future. Thanks, everybody, and take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Go vote. Go vote. Thank you. Good to see you, David.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Chris.